So I'm here to talk about sound and music and sort of its role in our lives. So there are a number of peculiar things about music and sound that are, and I guess our sense of hearing that are a little bit different. So again, I think to Gordon's point, much of the music and sound in our lives, and really primarily almost most of the sound, we're not even necessarily always aware that it's there, that it operates at this subconscious level. So first of all, I want to apologize to everybody. Once you start talking about all this multi-sensory stuff, you're not going to see your world or hear your world or smell your world or sense your world the same way. We've been having these conversations in preparation for this talk about how we're sort of maniacally looking at experiences and sort of tearing them apart and putting them back together again. And sound in particular is one of those senses that, again, we're not really aware of the fact that essentially every single moment of our lives is scored by music and sound. It is this hidden actor in our lives that is guiding our choices, changing our mood, and making and breaking emotional connections that we have with people, places, and things every single second of our lives. So if there are any parents in the room, especially, or any of us, actually, the sound of a baby cry is the sound that we all respond most viscerally to. And actually, it's a really good thing. Survival of the species, right? Just like we think about ancient man, when they heard a twig snap, it was actually incredibly important that all our senses, we heard that, and all of our senses were guided to see what was behind that bush, so we could determine whether that was lunch or we were about to become lunch. So sound, again, has this really, really interesting role in our lives, and then it guides all our other senses, and it draws our attention to specific senses. So everyone knows Mary Poppins, right? Lovely childhood children's character, very warm and friendly, a spoonful of sugar, no, somebody else. No, the point of the movie was, this was the ideal babysitter, right? So when you hear something a little different in association with the visuals, Mary Poppins becomes something just a bit different. So there's actually a bunch of these videos on the internet that are hilarious. Actually, somebody did one where they took The Shining and turned it into romantic comedy. So again, we respond to sound quicker than any other sense, even quicker than touch. And because of that, sound is this arbiter a lot of times of other multisensory experiences, that we tend to judge all our other senses against what we hear. If it makes sense to us, as Scott was talking about, the sort of idea of multisensory, really, when the senses are all tied together in unity, it's a very powerful experience, but that there's a lot of dissonance we feel when other senses don't line up with sound. So very, very important to remember that. And also, again, because sound, we experience it quicker than anything else. So I'll tell you a little story. One of the things so I'm a composer, I do a lot of different kinds of scoring. But I learned early on when I was working in horror in particular, that if you have the music bump and the sound actually hit on the scare, you would blow the entire gag in the horror movie. Actually, the sound and music needs to come just a little bit late, because you need to actually register the visuals of what you're seeing first, and then have the sound come slightly thereafter so that your sort of sensory input hits in the brain at the exact same time. Also, when you're thinking about the role of sound in attractions, think about what we call sonic semiotics. Everyone knows what semiotics are visually, right? You look at a stop sign and it's a certain color and there's a little white border around it, and even from a very great distance, just from the shape of the sign, you know what that sign is. So there are a lot of visual semiotics you're familiar with. There's also sonic semiotics. So strings in general in music, and listen, this is a bit of a gross generalization, but this is mostly true. Strings generally in music and sound, especially in film music and in attractions, tend to denote emotions like warmth, scale. These semiotics are at play in all of the different music and sound in our attractions. And we'll talk a little bit about this more in a moment, that not all music and sound obviously needs to be in your face and the most prevalent thing, the thing that actually grabs your attention the most in a multisensory experience. We'll talk about that again in a little bit. So here I think is the important thing to, we've been discussing this in our work across all the senses, but especially doubly true in music and sound. The world has changed. We really have different expectations in terms of how we interact with the world, whether it's in attractions or brands or other kinds of spaces. That we're much more craving experience focus, an experience focus. That it's an experience focused world, where it used to be much more a communication focused world. Tell me an interesting story, static, passive, one way. Visual by itself tends to be a little more static and passive, where sound and music tend to sort of push us more in those experience focused areas. And that's really what we're all talking about, is how you need to tie together all the senses to kind of be truly experience focused and think about the role of music and sound in this. So this is what I was alluding to before. I think the issue is not that there's not enough sound in the world. We are overrun with sound. And mostly it's sound that's being used very, very poorly. A lot of times it's sound and music that is just there to grab your attention and scream at you. And that may make you feel something, but it generally is not what we want people to feel in those experiences. A lot of times it might be just, whoa, back it off. Where's the volume control? How do I turn this down? Cover my ears. So we live in a very loud world. But if we're thinking, first of all, about music and sound that means something, that's part of that multisensory experience, and that also we're thinking about the role of sound moment to moment in our experiences. Where should the music and sound be foreground? Where should it be midground? Where should it be background? Really almost something that's barely audible, but just changing our mood in very, very subtle ways. So here's a quick example. We worked on a project, ING Worlds of Adventure in Dubai. It was a cartoon network land. So we used some existing IP and then also created some of our own new IP for this sound in the ambience in this enormous indoor amusement park. Now, it was functional and emotional. We wanted to put you in this cartoonisphere, the Cartoon Network land, but we also had to mask a lot of the unwanted sound from the lands that surrounded it. So you'll hear sort of how this sort of functional, emotional aspect of this particular soundtrack works. So it's pretty quiet in the space. It's not really grabbing your attention. Every once in a while, there's little tunes or moments where the music and sound might become a little bit more midground. But the way you experience it in the space, you can still have conversations. It's not meant to constantly be in your face and constantly be dragging your attention. Some of the more active parts, but there's some much more subtle parts. You'll hear even just that there are crickets in the background and the cartoon sphere. And again, that was a big part of trying to match some of the sound from the other areas. So sonic trees, these are the things, if you walk away with 3 things to think about in terms of how to utilize music and sound in attractions, experiences, and in branded experiences. First of all, it's not about the sound, it's about the experiences that we're creating. I'm a musician, I'm a composer, I love music, but I'm in service of the overall experience. It's not about that music and sound. A lot of times people will say, well, this is music that I love, and so it should be blaring. No, that's not creating great experiences. Think about the role of a film composer. What film composers do is we look at music and sound in service of telling the story moment to moment. Most of film score, you don't even know what it's doing to the film unless it's gone. If you take the music and sound out of the film, you don't understand how much it's doing to the film. Second thing is to use music and sound strategically. So what do I mean by strategically? It's purposefully. It's trying to think about, you really need to back out of the aesthetic and creative part of your mind. It's a very, very left and right brain exercise. And think about, what am I trying to accomplish? What do I want people to feel moment to moment? Where are the moments I need to give them a break from music and sound? The apparent appearance of silence. By the way, there's no such thing as silence. I'll talk about that in a second. And really the next thing is, what role can music and sound help to sort of drive that multi-sensory component we're talking about? So that sometimes maybe music and sound is more leading and sometimes it's more following in those experiences. But to think about it strategically, what are your objectives moment to moment in the story, and how can music and sound serve that? Third thing is, silence is our white space in design. One of the things that I would say in attractions that freak people out the most is when we're taking music and sound out of experiences. Well, wait, you guys are the music and sound guys, why are we taking everything? The answer is because without, everyone knows in design, without white space, you have chaos. Silence is the white space in the music and sound design area. And without ample white space, we're just completely, and I'm sure everyone has been through experiences before where the sound is just overwhelming front to back. And without those contrasts, without those moments of white space, apparent white space, we're really not creating great experiences. We might be overwhelming people, we might be stimulating all their senses, but that's not creating memorable experiences for people. So just one more thing about silence. There is no such thing as silence. There isn't. If you go into an anechoic chamber, which is maybe one of the places on the planet where there truly is silence, it's actually unnerving, because we are constantly attuned to trying to listen to the sounds in our environment. And when there's no sound in your environment, what happens? You start hearing your own sounds, your heartbeat, and your blood rushing through your veins. And if you sit in there long enough, you start hearing the electrical activity in your brain, believe it or not. So it's very, very unnerving. So don't think that when I say silence, I mean literal silence. It's really the perception of silence, which often is just a contrast from loud music and sound. Sometimes it's just a question of something that's extremely quiet and subtle and more tasteful in those moments. So quickly, the future of music and sound and experiences, and this is like, these are the places where we're really looking and trying to explore, and something I invite you all to look at and explore as well. First is massive multi-channel 3D spatialized audio. Right now, what do you have? Generally, you have vehicles with speakers behind your head. That's not bad. But what about if we had more of like an IMAX theater type of sound in large-scale attractions? What are the opportunities, even in a waiting area, for real large-scale spatialized audio, 3D spatialized audio? Why does my attention have to be forward in sort of a theatrical way? Why can't I have experiences surrounding me? We're doing this now, this type of work in VR and AR, but why not also in spaces? Second thing we're thinking about is artificial intelligence. How can soundtracks shift and morph dynamically? So this has been existing in video games for decades. Why not bring that kind of thinking, really decision trees, which may affect audio and soundscapes, which essentially is driving story and decision trees. through the use of artificial intelligence. That's another area we're playing. And the third is really thinking about the sort of integration of multiple touch points across a large scale. Everyone knows now that the experiences you have in theme parks and other kinds of places, they don't just exist in the actual ride and attraction by itself. There are pre-shows. There are often now post-shows. Sometimes music and sound can be used as a memory trigger. We were talking about memory triggers before in terms of reminding you what a great experience you had later in digital, in terms of apps, in terms of looking at other ways that we're connecting consumers in things like retail stores. Why should the retail store soundtrack be disassociated from the ride and the experience? There's ways to tie those things together across touch points. So those are the places that we're looking to play and looking to sort of improve guest experiences, and places I suggest you consider as well. So, quick sum up, because we're going to put you guys all to work. That little envelope is about to explain in just a moment. But what I want to, when we're talking about everything we talked about today, if you only walked away with 4 general ideas, these are the things we'd like you to think about. Think multi-sensory at the inception. If your concepts and your ideas at the beginning include multi-sensory thinking, you will be successful in the things that the 3 of us have been talking about today. If you try to add multi-sensory layers later, it almost never works. Second, think about a creative systems brain trust. We all know how important it is for creative and systems to get along in attractions. Nowhere is that more important than in multi-sensory experiences that we're trying to create. What is possible in terms of systems at the beginning of a project, there are many, many more possibilities than there are after things have already been baked. We know this. So it's really, really important in multi-sensory experiences to be thinking about that. Third is to think about creating powerful and efficient experiences. What do we mean by efficient? Efficient is maybe not stimulating all the senses all the time. Maybe it's not about maximalism. Maybe there's an opportunity, very, very simply, with a small sensory cue to really advance a story without thinking about the sort of kitchen sink approach to multisensory. So we think about creating powerful but efficient experiences in multisensory. And the fourth thing, which we're all going to practice right now, and I want to suggest that you think about, is making sonic mood boards part of your brief. So we're going to talk about a sonic mood board in a second.